Hi, what's up everyone? It's me, Karen, your favorite booktuber, and I'm here to talk about all the books that I read in the month of August. It actually was not that many books. I only read 5. Warning, I think I'm going to do a little bit of a preamble chat, and if that's not of interest to you, I'll put the timestamps so you can skip ahead to when I'm actually chatting about the books that I read. Actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I think one of the reasons why I didn't read as many books as I wanted to or like to read is because I didn't do anything on audiobook. Actually, I did one thing, but that was just finishing something up, and yeah, that's probably why. I mostly was reading physical books, and I read these books, most of them, I would say, because of a writing workshop that I'm doing. I'm doing a year-long writing workshop, Andrew Martin's year-long novel writing workshop, which has been a lot of fun. Yeah, so I'll be talking about some of those books that I read through that, and that's what this video is going to be about mostly. And then just, I don't know, I feel as if I have things I want to talk about, but I don't know the right medium to do so because I haven't vlogged. I've been feeling really like dissatisfied by YouTube and maybe like disheartened. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think also part of it is that for most of this year, it's kind of been a bit of a wash for me. I don't know if that's the saying, but the eye incident really took me out and affected a lot of my year. And I ended up like switching doctors and everything. Like it was a whole thing, and really made me very upset for a lot of whatever. So I don't know. I have like no memory of like this year in a way. Like I don't know what the high points would be, and I'm kind of speaking about that because we are, you know, inching towards the end of the year, and I think I want to make more YouTube videos, and because I do like YouTube, but I don't really know what to do. And so if you have any suggestions, I'm all ears and eyes. And yeah, I'd just be interested in some ideas. I think that a lot of like booktube vlog kind of stuff does lean into a very highly like aesthetic or cozy kind of vibe. And I don't think that, one, I'm not really able to deliver on a consistent aesthetic. And then secondly, I'm not particularly cozy. It's just, I speak at this cadence. I've realized that there's a lot of like, it's in vogue right now to speak in a very like soft, monotone sort of way, dulcet tones, which isn't my speaking voice, and it'd be very put on if I were to act like that. And so as I mentioned, I think in a previous wrap up, I hadn't been watching a lot of YouTube, and that still is for the most part true. However, I actually have been watching the vlogs of Stassi, one of Kylie Jenner's friends, and Vic, and then also Anna and Mandy Vakili, who are, well, Anna was on Love Island season 5 UK, one of the best to have come out of the franchise, I think. And I have been really liking their vlogs. They're very funny. They're not particularly aesthetic. It's a lot of talking, and in particular for like the Stas and Vic's like video content, it's very carefree and fun, which is exciting to watch. And they start their videos being like, hi vloggy vlog. It's just like so silly but very catchy. I'm like, I like hearing vloggy vlog. But anyways, yeah, that's that kind of tangent. I mean, there's more to it. I have all of these like thoughts on the current state of the internet, the world, social media, my dissatisfaction with everything, but I just don't know if there's any utility in me even speaking about it. So instead I like hint about things and then just drop it, and instead have like these long ass fucking monologues in my head about my dissatisfaction. I have once again deleted TikTok. So we're off TikTok again. I want to delete Instagram, but I can't because of work stuff. And yeah, I just like want to spend less time on my phone. And honestly, my screen time isn't even that bad, but I just want to throw my phone like in the ocean or something. I mean, that'd be really bad, I think. You know, like that's not very friendly to the ocean, so I wouldn't want to do that. But I don't want a phone anymore. I'm sick of it. I don't want to hold on to this brick of a device, and it's really sad going out into the world and seeing people on their phone. Okay, yeah, so that was most of that conversation. The second thing that I wanted to say is that I went to Japan At the end of August, beginning of September for my birthday. Oh yeah, I wanted to do a birthday book haul because I haven't been buying as many books this year, but I did, there was a few that I was eyeing and I was like, oh, my birthday is a good reason to do so. So I guess that's something I can share with you guys at some point. But yeah, I went to Japan and it was really nice. I really enjoyed it. It was different than I expected. I think partially it's because there's in anticipation of this occasion, this trip, I had, well, two things I want to say. First is that I had filmed some stuff while I was there, but I didn't really film many talking clips, so I'm not sure if that would be interesting to share. I had the intention to film a vlog or make something out of it, but then when I was there, I just like wasn't in the mood to talk. I was doing a lot of like looking and observing and thinking and some reading, and I watched like 2 or 3 movies because I had jet lag. And I was like occasionally waking up at like 4 a.m. or 2 a.m. Yeah, I went there by myself. I mostly spent a lot of my time in Kyoto and Tokyo, and as I was saying, it was different than what I expected because in anticipation of this event, of this trip, I had been watching a lot of like, for more than a year, because I'd been wanting to do this for such a long time, watching vlogs and TikTok videos and just everything. So I had like some expectations based off of that. And then I got there and it was just, yes, different than I expected, but also like some of what I had seen and like been watching, I was somewhat able to like experience that or has somewhat of a similar experience. And I spent 2 weeks there. It was really, really, really hot. But I also loved how hot it was. It was just felt so nice and warm to me, especially because once I came back here to New England and, the Northeast, it was, summer's we're at the tail end of summer, and so the temperatures in Japan were like 98 degrees, and then I came here and it was like 73, sometimes 68 or something, like a 20 to 30 degree temperature drop, and that was so hard for me. I felt as if I was in the midst of winter. I was very, 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 very cold, and because had I had stayed here, I would have slowly like acclimated to this weather change and been like, oh, like we're having such lovely cool days, like whatever. But instead I'm like freezing. It's very cold. I'm very unhappy. And yeah, I don't know. I did read some really interesting books while I was there that I'm looking forward to chatting with you guys about. But let's get into my actual wrap up. I've just been going on for a bit too long. Anyways, okay. The first book that I read in the month of August was Desperate Characters by Paula Fox. And this is, okay, some backstory. This is a book that I've seen in the bookstores for so long. And it always has like prime real estate in a bookstore. It's often like has the staff review or whatever. And I didn't want to pick it up because I don't like this cover. Really don't like this cover. It is very fitting for this book, but I didn't like it. Anyways, this is like very contained. It probably takes place over, I don't know, a week. It's not that long of a time span that we're covering. And it looks at Otto and Sophie, a married couple, and I think this is the 70s or late 60s. They're living in Brooklyn. They've just moved to this one area that is getting gentrified, and they are part of the gentrifiers. And you have the husband, Otto, who is a lawyer and somewhat conservative, and then he is married to Sophie, and she works, but she doesn't really need to, and she's kind of like dissatisfied with her work, so she hasn't really been working a lot. She doesn't really know what she wants to do. Both of these people, they're middle-aged, and in some regards they're kind of grappling with a bit of a, not midlife crisis, but just like contending with the realities of their life and their sort of unhappiness and their expectations of the world and whatever. Anyways, okay. So how this book kicks off is that we're introduced to these two characters. They're sitting in their house. We get this like description of, specific furniture that they have, like kind of like a scene setting. And then we're introduced to the characters. And what quickly happens is that Sophie, her name, she is She sees a cat outside, a stray cat, and she decides to feed it, give it like some milk or whatever. She pets it, and this cat bites her. And she's kind of like shocked that this has occurred, that her act of kindness has been repaid in such a manner. And she then spends the rest of the book like this. This is the inciting incident. I was about to say inciting accident. This is the incident that propels most of the novel, as she is grappling with like whether or not she possibly has rabies. Is she overreacting in her response to this? This moment allows them to spiral and like consider their life. And as we progress to the weekend, kind of like, I think the back of the book says like violent things are happening to them, but they're not. Well, I guess some are, but you see kind of these things are happening and everything kind of has a very aggressive light to it. So one of the things that is happening in Otto's life is that he has a business partnership with this guy. I think his name is Charlie, and Charlie and Otto are like very different ends of the spectrum politically and also temperament. And they have been lawyers with their own law firm for like a while, and then they decide to split ways because their paths no longer align. Essentially, they have kind of been work besties for such a long time and have known each other's personalities. But I think it's one of those things where sometimes you get to know someone too much, and after a certain point it is too much, and the things that you loved about them then become the things that you dislike. So then they split ways, and this kind of like this like storm of a cloud is hovering over the book. And one of the reasons is like this break between these two people. And you know, Sophie's like, are you guys not able to work it out? Like, what's going on? She didn't really like know a lot of the situation, so we don't know like full entire details about it. But Charlie does come up in the book, like midway through the book. He and Sophie have a little encounter, and you know, it's this conversation that they keep on returning to. And as the weekend progresses, you see Sophie thinking about her relationship and the brief affair that she had. And then they go not upstate, to the Hamptons, sort of, I think, or like close to the Hamptons. They have a house there, and they get to the house and they go there looking for an escape, but that does not happen because once again, they kind of feel it's as if the world is like conspiring against them. They're just being met by these obstacles and resistance. And there's this tone throughout the book that like gives it this like darker like undercurrent to everything. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting here is also the way in which both of these characters, who are in their 40s, they don't have children, and they're kind of aware of the fact that like, you know, they've almost like missed the boat in that regard, and they're a bit just like, oh, should we have had kids? Would our life have been, you know, would we not be feeling the way that we feel now if we had kids? This sort of dissatisfaction with each other and their life. But they don't have kids, and yet both characters spend a lot of time thinking about their own parents. Through Sophie, we get a lot more of the flashbacks, and then Otto will verbalize it to his wife. Sophie thinks a lot about the difference between her mother and her father. Her father is no longer in the picture, but he died. Her mother is, and she doesn't really speak to her mother very often, and she like wants to sort of write to her, but she's unable to. And she's thinking about how like her mother had this like real drive, and she made things happen. She was kind of like the breadwinner, and her father had charisma. I guess you could think of it as a bit like Jackie O's father, like very charismatic. The daughter had like a strong connection to her father, but the father was an alcoholic. It's like similar to this. The father does drink a lot as well. But she's like thinking about both of them and kind of considering like what elements of each does she have and like their personality traits. And this is kind of connecting to her own apathy towards her work and what she's been doing with her life. And does she need to work? Because she doesn't, but she kind of wants to be productive but isn't able to. And then the husband in this book, Otto, he at one point spends a lot of time thinking about his father, and there's this long monologue about it. And I thought that was like kind of an interesting thing here, the ways in which the specter of the parents is still, and I guess like doesn't really ever go away, that their influence is felt in this book, though they're not characters we're actually introduced to really. And throughout this, we're primarily, it's like an interesting use of third person POV. The author does some like interesting stuff where she'll Often we're very close, we're on a close third with Sophie, but there are moments where we dip into Otto's head, and that happens like on the first page, the first paragraph. We are in Otto's head, and then we quickly move to Sophie's POV, and then at one point in the middle of the book, there's something really interesting that occurs where we're seeing what one of the other houses on their street is experiencing, the crying child, and then it switches perspective to that of a mouse, and then we go to Otto, and then Otto enacts a violence, and you're seeing here also like this sort of war between, what are their names? Otto and Sophie. I've been saying them so much and yet somehow I still forgot. That is interesting because in September, most recently, I read The Waiting Years by Fumiko Enchi, and that also has this sort of marital war and, you know, these warring, you know, figures who don't want to bow down and to like submit to the other. I'll talk a lot more about that book because I really enjoyed it. And that's a bit of a spoiler for what's coming up next month. I think maybe there's a small section I want to read. This is on page 120. When Otto came home, he discovered Sophie off in a corner of the living room, sitting in a formal chair no one ever sat in, stippled with light and shadow. Her silence and the dining room table set for dinner, which he glimpsed through the living room doors, looked like a set piece arranged for some purpose that had subsequently been forgotten. He had the impression she was weeping without sound, and that perhaps the elements of this forlorn scene had been contrived for his benefit, a domestic lesson that was to elicit from him an apology. He spoke brusquely. Why are you sitting there like an orphan? There's a little bit of a paragraph. She'd been reading a book, she had not been crying, and then this is what is written next. She got up and came to him, swishing on lamps as she moved, and put the book in his hand. She was not crying. The dining room table was set for two, not part of a set, only a detail of their routine. He considered what he had thought he had seen, an outsider's view of their life, inaccurately judged perhaps, but for a second he had not been enmeshed in it, had not been oblivious. And then he says, let's eat in the living room. Okay, that is that. After that, I did an audiobook, Lower Than Angels, A History of Sex and Christianity. This book is by the same author who wrote Christianity 3,000 Years, which I had read, earlier in the summer. And I'm not going to go too deep into this book because, one, as a recurring sort of theme, I seem to have lost wherever I wrote notes. And secondly, I did this book on audio and I need to go into a bookstore or a library and look at it physically because there are correlating images with it. And I think I need that little bit of additional visual context to fully grasp what was going on here. But this book is considering sex and Christianity, as its subtitle says. I think there's a little bit of an overlap with that first Christianity book. I think the first two chapters kind of give you this overview that was in that book, and then we really dive in and go very specific and focused on this theme. And what the author is looking at is the changing relationship the church and Christianity has had with sex, and at what point did sex and marriage become a sacrament, and the different relationships that different figures within the church and different sects may have had with sex, and how it was integrated into it, how the private became part of this religious domain and something that the church was able to arbitrate on. And it was interesting, but it wasn't, I think I had expectations going into it of what I thought it was going to be, but that was not it. And I think if you have an interest in this topic, you should probably check it out. It is quite interesting. And that's all I kind of want to say about that one. After that, I read Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid. This is another one of those books that I have felt as if I should have read for a long, long, long time, but finally got around to because of my workshop. And so this is the first Jamaica Kincaid book that I've read. And from my understanding of it, it is fairly sort of autobiographical, or pulls a lot from her own details. This is telling the story of Lucy. This is first person and kind of almost episodic, fragmentary almost. We have 4 or 5 main sections in which the narrator will kind of have these themes, and that's sort of the subtitle, and she often returns to it, or this image. One of the sections is called The Tongue, and it starts with her talking about kissing, and then she returns to the tongue quite a bit, and one of her favorite meals when she was growing up, and it's this recurring motif almost. And So this tells the story of Lucy. Lucy is a girl from the West Indies who has come to, okay, I thought it was New York. I don't think it's ever specified, but I literally envisioned her being in New York for the entirety of this book. So we're gonna run with that. She's moved to New York where she is an au pair for this couple who seem perfect. They are married, they have 3 kids, they live in this nice little house. I think the husband is a lawyer, and everything seems perfect and grand. But Lucy, she's looking and she sees cracks in the foundation, and we're kind of tracking those cracks in this foundation. And you would think that this is going to be, oh, I guess there's like a bug. Okay, so you think that this, at first I thought that this was going to be very much so like this, a look at this marriage, but that's not the main focus here. This is a lot about Lucy and Lucy's sort of coming of age story. It's about her trying to establish a life for herself in New York, to divorce herself from her ties to her country, her homeland, and her mother. This is a lot about the mother, but it doesn't really occur to us until maybe like midway or towards the end of it. So in a similar way, I think you could look at both of these and consider how the parent as God almost, is very important. There's a way in which the language here is very, very simple and straightforward, and but there's still like a real like power to the language and the insights that Lucy provides. I did find Lucy to be, she's a very, very angry narrator. She feels a lot of anger towards the wife in the house that she lives with, the au pair, I don't know, what would you call that, to her employer. And so what's this woman's name? Mariah will do something kind, and Lucy will get really mad at her and be very rude and like enact a sort of violence or respond in a way that like shakes Mariah's sort of confidence and points out the differences. Because one of the things here in the first section is Lucy finds herself asking, like, how is it possible that Mariah can be so happy? What kind of life did she live that the greatest injustice that could occur to her is that it's a spring day and it rains, and that is the scale of her problems. And Lucy, in a way, she reminded me of how the angry young man trope that was very prevalent in the 70s, 80s in Bollywood, of which Amitabh Bachchan was the poster child. Well, not the poster child, like the poster man of the angry young man motif and whatever. Like, Lucy is angry, and that's a very strong reoccurring thing in this. She's kind of pointing out the ways in which her anger at colonization and the differences that she is seeing in this world that Mariah lives in, but she's also very astute, and she's able to make observations about the world that she's in, the ways in which Mariah and her peers are moving. Color is very important in this, and so in the first section, she's talking a lot about the color yellow, and like she returns to this very often, and instead of saying that the family that she's living with, that they have blonde hair, it's their yellow hair, the yellow walls of the room, the yellow sunlight. It's just this very interesting device that she's employed, Jamaica Kincaid, the author, has employed to just kind of create a sort of difference and to cast everything in a different light. I thought that was really quite well done. And I think I'm going to read 2 small sections. This is on page 47. She's kind of observing Lewis and Mariah, this married couple. Lewis has just walked into the kitchen. He made a mock animal sound to Muriel and waved the newspaper at me, and he walked over to Mariah and embraced her from behind and licked the side of her neck with his tongue. She leaned her head backward and rested it on his shoulder. She was a little shorter than he, and that looked so wrong. It looks better when a woman is a little taller than her husband. And she sighed and shuddered in pleasure. The whole thing had an air of untruth about it. They didn't mean to do what they were doing at all. It was a show, not for anyone else's benefit, but a show for each other. And how did I know this? I could just tell that it was a show and not something to be trusted. And then this is on the next page, page 48. My sympathies were with Mariah. It was my mother who told me that I should never take a man's side over a woman's. By that, she meant I should never have feelings of possession for another woman's husband. It was from her own experience that she spoke, the experience of having a woman who had loved my father and whose love he had not returned try to kill her while they left my father without so much as a singed hair on his head. And then this is on page 90. This is kind of speaking to Lucy's ruminations on her mother. My past was my mother. I could hear her voice, and she spoke to me not in English or the French patois that she sometimes spoke, or in any language that needed help from the tongue. She spoke to me in language anyone, female, could understand, and I was undeniably that, female. Oh, it was a laugh, for I had spent so much time saying I did not want to be like my mother that I had missed the whole story. I was not like my mother. I was my mother. And I could see now why, to the few feeble attempts I made to draw a line between us, her reply always was, you can run away, but you cannot escape the fact that I'm your mother. My blood runs in you. I carried you for 9 months inside me. How else was I to take such a statement but as a sentence for a life in a prison whose bars were stronger than any iron imaginable? I had, at that very moment, a collection of letters from her in my room, 19 in all, one for every year of my life, unopened. I thought of opening the letters, not to read them, but to burn them at the four corners and send them back to her unread. It was an act, I had read somewhere, of one lover rejecting another, but I could not trust myself to go too near them. I knew that if I read only one, I would die from longing for her. Yeah. I thought, like, okay, first, in between both of those sections, we see the tongue, Lewis's tongue kissing on the mother and kissing on the wife, Mariah, and then here the tongue in reference to the language that the mother is speaking that Lucy can always reference. But then also even in that section about Lewis and Mariah, she returns to her mother to talk about what her mother had taught her about the relationships between men and women, and also the role in which she as a woman should play in this situation and scenarios that will occur when sometimes people step out of bounds. And then here you see her like focus specifically on her mother. She's talking about her resentment and kind of the ways in which her mother will, they're always connected, yes, because that is something that cannot really be broken. And then her anger at these letters, her desire to burn them, to rip them apart, to have none of them near her, but yet she knows that if she were to read them, just even one, she would long for her. It's really quite well done. Though there are times where I felt very, at times like angry with Lucy. I had to take a break in the middle. After that, I returned to Laurie Colwin. This was her final novel published after she died. And this one took me a very long time to read. I took a break in the middle. It is similar to most of Laurie Colwin's novels, of which 4 of them I read in August. This is looking at a woman in her mid-30s, late 30s, who, living in New York, she works at this kind of like artsy, unique little publishing company, and she has finally gotten married to a man she loves very dearly, and she has a bestie, and her bestie is also like married or is going to get married, something like that, to Mookie, who happens to be Black, and you know that's a point of contention with her best friend's family, and like so that sometimes there's elements of that are popping through. And we're looking at this character who grew up in a very different lifestyle than her husband. Her husband like grew up in Connecticut suburbs, and she just feels such an attachment to his sort of like family home and this desire to be connected to it, but also she's like aware of the fact that this isn't her reality, that she was someone who, you know, her family sort of like moved a lot, money was more of an issue, and she just kind of feels this like distance but a desire for that. And a lot of this is dealing with her inner world, and both her and her bestie have decided that they're going to have kids at the same time. So you're seeing their journey towards motherhood, but also before we get there, there's I mean, throughout the entire novel, there's a lot of, this character's name? Jane. Jane has a lot of anxiety in general, but about her place in the world, about her relationship with her husband, sort of, that like, is he, like, her recognition that she knows his personality so well, but there are occasionally moments where she like wants just a tiny bit more, but she knows that it's not exactly like in his nature to show love in that way. And yeah, I don't know. It's just one of those things where it is like very slow moving. There's some really great sentences and nothing happens. There's no like real plot here. There is a big storm at one point, but it doesn't really knock anything over. It just scares her a little bit. And I will, once again, I think the reoccurring thing here is that I will be reading from a lot of these books. There's two things that I want to read. One of them was something that I thought was like so brilliant. Oh, okay, this is on page 36. Now as they walked home in the dark, she knew she would never know what he was thinking. They had met too late in life to be each other's perfect other, but she felt toward him a kind of teen passion as well as a kind of grown-up gratitude. It didn't matter if she would never quite know what was on his mind. He was hers. And then this also, in the same way as that last book that I had read from her, the one that made me cry, Happy All the Time. Is that the one? No, that's not the one. Happy All the Time didn't make me cry. It was Goodbye Without Leaving. That has like that emotional sort of something at the end, and that also happens here. And this is like, it seems as if there's a lot of, the last two novels are considering time and like the ways in which children growing up, our own aging, and there's something similar here. It just didn't hit the same emotional note for me as the other one did, but thematically this has those, as I mentioned, like the belonging, family, those are conversations that they're having as the main character Jane and her bestie are kind of, they have a found family vibe, and they're looking at their family and they're discontent with their family and just how they are building their own family. I'm sorry to be repeating that word so much, but it's a lot about that. Like that's like a lot of what's driving some of this anxiety and this like desire to belong, and like where does one belong and how family fits within that, and how one might belong with them or doesn't, or how one fights against those boundaries. There is stuff in this book about the Vietnam War because Jane's husband Teddy was a war veteran, and it's not something that he really talks about, but there's a lot of like darkness there. And so that I thought was interesting. And I think maybe there was one more thing that I wanted to read, but actually no, it's fine. I've read enough out loud. And then the final book that I read in the month of July, Lord, in the month of August was another one of those books that is, I should have read a lot earlier. I had not. This was my first time reading it, and that happens to be The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Sparks. Just one spark, not many sparks. Okay, so this is sort of like a story of a group. Yes, that's what we think it's going to be. Jean Brodie is a teacher at the school in Edinburgh, and she is not like the other teachers. She's in her prime, and she's a very charismatic teacher. She has like charm and poise, and she has handpicked 6 girls who all have a individualistic character that makes them separate, that makes them the creme de la creme, that they are worthy of being part of Miss Jean Brodie's brood. One of them is really good at math, another is good at gymnastics, so she will do the splits and a cartwheel, and another has a really interesting diction, so when she speaks, Jean Brodie loves the way that the vowels are coming out of her mouth. And there's another girl who's like quite beautiful and who, well, this is sort of a recurring idea, she will be known for her sex. And there's this kind of like repetition here because there's these 6 young girls. We have Miss Brodie, and some of these girls are not as important as some of the others. And we are spanning what this novel probably spans about 10 years, maybe more than that. When we're first introduced to the girls, they're probably like 8 or 9, and then we see, you know, when they're 11 or 12, and then like we jump forward a little bit in time, and we're just sort of seeing what happens to Miss Jean Brodie, what happens after her prime, or not really, what causes her downfall, if you would. And because what ends up happening is that Miss Jean Brodie in her school setting is someone who the other teachers and the administration and the headmistress don't like her because she has novel ideas, because she doesn't always teach in her class. Instead, she'll talk about her love life or like be monologuing on art and her trips to Italy and her love for things in Italy. Ends up happening is that often, you know, there's conflict between the administration and Miss Jean Brodie, and then we discover that finally it occurs. They are able to kick her out, and she was betrayed by one of her own girls, by one of the Brodie set. And as we're kind of figuring out, we're trying to like piece together a picture of who betrayed her, why did they betray her. And as it progresses, I think what's really interesting here is the way in which the author doles out information. I think it's like probably on page 26, we find out how Miss Brodie's end occurs. Just after the war, she was retired by then. Her retirement was rather a tragedy. She was forced to retire before time. The head never liked her. There's a long story attached to Miss Brodie's retirement. She was betrayed by one of her own girls. We were called the Brodie set. I never found out which one betrayed her. I'm having like a hard time getting my words out. So that's told on page 26. We know that Miss Brodie's end occurs in a very untimely, ill-fashioned sort of way, and then later on we find out more. I think it's like on page 60 we find out who betrayed her. I won't read it to you, or should I don't know. Okay, this is on page 63, and I'll blurb out who it was so that you can have this mystery. The whine in her voice betrayed me, bored and afflicted, redacted. It is 7 years, thought, redacted, since I betrayed this tiresome woman. What does she mean by betray? She was looking at the hills as if to see there the first and unbetrayable Miss Brodie, indifferent to criticism as a crag. And so that happens like midway through the novel. We discover who it is that betrayed her, and then slowly we find out a little bit more about like why it is that she had been betrayed. And then at the end, we kind of find out what it is, the reason, what excuse was used to sort of make the dismissal from her position occur. And so I thought that was like a really interesting device, the ways in which we're like told the information, but we still keep reading it. And the author like tells it in a very like, she kind of like drops the information in there, and then we piece together things more. I thought it was very interesting. That's not very helpful, is it? The way the story is told, this use of the group, and then the kind of narrowing in on one of the girls in particular. We stay fairly often in her head. We never see Miss Brodie's like thoughts. We never know what's actually going in her head. And there is sort of this, yeah, I mean, it's just like a very interesting book. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's kind of all I'm going to say there. I think it's definitely worth checking out. It's quite slim. I think a lot of these books that I read have a lot going on that you're able to like go back to them and have a lot to ponder over. Maybe that's possibly why I didn't read as much as I did, because I had a lot of material to work with, even though all three of these books are so slim. They're all quite thought-provoking from a craft level, but then also, you know, thematically, I think what they're covering is quite interesting. So yeah, that was my month of reading in the month of August. I would love to hear from you if you read any good books. I'd love to just hear from you. Let me know how your life is. I would love to know about how summer's been treating you, how fall is now treating you, since we're moving on over into fall. I think I'd want to do my mid-year wrap-up video, or the mid-year tag. I know we're not in the mid-year, but this is the 1 year that I've not done it, and it's weighing on me, because that is generally a video that I like. But I will let you carry on with the rest of your day. Thanks for watching. Bye.